Blender has more than 50 modifiers, each of them with a different purpose and use case. Some of them super useful, and some quite hard to wrap your head around. So today, not only will I be explaining, but I will also be ranking each one of them based on how useful and powerful they are. Starting off with arguably one of the most useful modifiers in Blender, the geometry node modifier. Just imagine, you can add a single modifier that can do whatever the fuck you want it to do. Want to make a forest? Geometry nodes. Want to make a city? Geometry nodes. Want to do whatever the fuck this is? Still geometry nodes. Basically, endless possibilities. So it's safe to say, it deserves to be in the S tier. Coming up, we have the edit category section, which right off the bat gets a lot of people confused. So I'll try to explain it briefly with practical examples. The first modifier from this category is the data transfer modifier, which frankly does what it says. It lets you copy another object's data. It could be its UVs, its normals, or vertex data. One super useful and practical use case of this modifier is when you have a model that you want to merge with another object, but you want to keep them separate. That's when you can use this modifier to help you do that. Another use case is when you have a model with dirty shading artifacts that you can't get rid of no matter what. So you use another model similar to your own model, and then use the data transfer to transfer the clean shading onto the model with the bad shading. Just note that doing this should be your last resort. It's when you've tried everything and your model's shading is still messed up. You wouldn't need it every day, but when you do need it, it comes in clutch. So I'll put it in B tier. Next we have mesh cache and mesh sequence cache modifiers. The mesh cache modifier lets you import vertex animation files like .mdd and .pc2, and it gives you some control over how the animations behave. The mesh sequence cache modifier is essentially the same thing, but instead of reading .mdd and .pc2 files, it reads Alembic and USD files, which are more commonly used in modern pipelines. The mesh sequence cache modifier also gives you a lot more options and flexibility. Therefore, I will put mesh sequence cache in B and mesh cache in C. After that, we have the UV project and UV warp modifiers. UV project works just like a real-life projector. Imagine you have a projector like in a movie theater and a 3D object in front of it. The UV project modifier takes the UV and projects it onto the mesh from the point of view of that projector, which is usually a camera or an empty. I've used it in the past and it works really good. B tier. The UV warp modifier kinda works like the transform node in the shader editor. You can assign an empty to the modifier and then you'll be able to control your UV map by moving, scaling, or rotating your empty, or any other object for that matter. I think it can be handy for some people. I just put it in C. I don't really use it that much. After that we have the vertex weight edit, mix, and proximity modifiers. The vertex weight edit modifier lets you alter your vertex group with some simple sliders. The vertex weight mix modifier works like a mix node. It lets you combine two different vertex groups in different types of operations. At last, we have the vertex weight proximity modifier, which allows you to control the vertex group with the proximity of another object. These can all be quite handy in the respective use cases, but personally, I haven't found the need to use them, so I'll just put them in C tier. Now we have arrived at the fun bits, the generators. Our first generator modifier is the one and only array modifier. It helps you to duplicate your object as many times as you want, and the new version of Blender, it got a huge buff, which added a lot of cool controls. It also works great when paired with the curve modifier, which we'll talk about when we get to the Deform modifier section. Array is an absolute must-have, therefore it deserves its spot in the S tier. Next is the bevel modifier, that helps you round out your model's edges, which can greatly improve the look of your models. Another no-brainer, instant S. Next up is the Boolean modifier, and it has 3 modes, which I will explain them one by one. The first mode, and the most used one, is difference. It basically turns the object that we selected into a cutter, so you can cut your objects with it. The next mode is union, which joins the objects together, and the last one is called intersect, which, as it says, only shows you the parts where the 2 objects are intersecting. Although the Boolean modifier is super useful, it can also give you a lot of problems if you don't know what you're doing. So I'll put it in A, but like a really solid A, like A+. Next up, we have the build modifier. Using this is pretty easy. You just add it to your object, and when you change this value here, you can see this disappearing effect. I'm pretty sure someone can make this look good, but to be honest, it's just really limited, and if you want to do some motion graphics, this will not cut it. So therefore, this will be our first D, unfortunately. Next is the curve to tube modifier that got added in the new 5.0 version. And as it says, it helps you to turn a curve object into tubes. I think it's a great addition to the modifiers that we already have, and I will probably use it a lot. S tier. Our next modifier is the decimate modifier. If you have a high poly mesh that you want to quickly lower its poly count, you can use the decimate modifier. The good thing about it is that it prioritizes areas with high detail. So flat areas get a lower poly count, and areas that need more detail preserve their poly count. I use this all the time, and in my opinion is one of the best modifiers. S tier. The edge split modifier disconnects and separates all your faces from each other based on how sharp the angle between them is. There are a couple of use cases for this, but personally I haven't found them that helpful, so I put them in D tier. The mask modifier, in the other hand, is really helpful when I'm trying to prevent a part of my mesh from showing up in the render, but at the same time I don't want to delete it, because later I might change my mind. It's pretty handy, so I think it deserves a B spot at least. The mirror modifier by far is one of the most used modifiers in Blender. And as it says, it helps you to mirror your objects in different axes, so you don't have to worry about symmetry. So yeah, S. The multi-res modifier lets you sculpt your model in different poly count levels, meaning if you want to sculpt fine details, you increase the level, and then if you want to go back and make more major changes, you can use a lower level. It's pretty essential for sculpting, so I will put it in A tier. The remesh modifier gives you different algorithms for remeshing your model. I quite like the blocks method because it gives some cool effects. Therefore, I'll put it in B. Now we have the scatter on surface modifier, which was also among the new modifiers that got added in Blender 5.0. As the name suggests, it helps you scatter objects on a selected surface. That's pretty much all the basic parameters that you need for scattering, and I'm super glad that they finally added something like this. S tier. The screw modifier helps you to create the stuff like screws, springs, telephone cables, and ropes. It's pretty handy, solid B as well. The skin modifier generates geometry around your edges. You can do some cool abstract art with it, and all sort of other things. B tier. The solidify modifier adds thickness to your model to make them all girthy and thick.
What do you mean by that?
S tier. And now we have officially arrived at the absolute GOAT of modifiers. The subdivision surface modifier, or sub-D for short. This modifier helps you to smooth out your mesh and add geometry to it. No need to say S tier. The main purpose of the triangulate modifier is when you want to export your model to a game engine or some other program that uses triangulated topology. So instead of letting the software triangulate the model for you, you triangulate it yourself inside Blender. So you'll have more control over how the model looks when triangulated. This is pretty useful for game devs, so I think B tier is a good spot for it. The volume to mesh modifier allows you to turn any volume, it could be a smoke or cloud, and turn it into a mesh. C tier. The weld modifier merges vertices into each other based on the distance between them. For example, here my bevel node seems to be doing nothing, and that's because I have an edge loop that prevents my bevel modifier from working properly. So I use the weld modifier to merge these vertices. C tier. The wireframe modifier turns the edges of your model into tubes, which you can use for all sort of things from fences, trash cans, and cages. Another S tier. We have now reached the Deform modifiers, with our first Deform modifier being the armature modifier. Considering that any character you're going to make needs an armature to move, it's safe to say that it deserves the A tier. Because Deform modifier is able to deform your object to any predefined primitive like a sphere, cylinder, or a cube. And I guess it could be useful, but still for really niche stuff. D tier. Then we have the famous curve modifier that lets you deform your objects along a curve. This is also one of the most used and important modifiers to know how to use, and it's definitely deserving of the S tier. The displace modifier displaces your mesh based on a given texture. It's an absolute must if you want to make environments or create some procedural effects. Therefore, I have to put it in the S tier. The hook modifier lets you use an object to deform the main object like a hook. And you can set the fall off of the hook, which can be quite nice to have. Still, it's a solid modifier, but it's just not that essential. So I'll put it in C. The Laplacian Deform modifier is quite similar to the hook modifier, but what advantage that it has is that it can use multiple hooks to keep the mesh's shape intact. Honestly, it's a bit complicated to set up, and it also produces results that you can achieve in many other ways. It's an F for me. Next, the lattice modifier. Not gonna lie, personally, one of my absolute favorites. You basically add a lattice object, put your object in it, and with the help of the lattice modifier, you deform your object. It's perfect when I have a really dense mesh that you want to deform. For example, I had this cliff 3D scan that I wanted to bend so it would follow the curve of this road path. So I used the lattice modifier to do that. And I absolutely love it, and I think people should use it more often. S tier. The mesh deform modifier is almost the same thing as the lattice modifier, but instead of using a lattice object, we use another mesh. But there are some downsides to this compared to the lattice modifier. First, it is a bit heavier to compute, especially when working with dense meshes. Another big one is that with the lattice modifier, you can change the resolution of your lattice to get more control over a mesh whenever you want. But with the mesh deform modifier, if you want to increase the resolution, you have to click this unbind button, which resets any changes you have made previously. So unless you have a specific case where you need this, I don't see much advantage in choosing this over the lattice modifier. So I'm giving it a C. The shrink wrap modifier is used for all sort of purposes, like making stickers, sticking a poster on something, or retopologizing, and things like that. It is super useful. A tier. The simple deform modifier lets you bend your object in different ways. It's easy and simple to use. B tier. The smooth modifier is smooth out your mesh. That is literally what it does. I don't know. C tier. The smooth corrective modifier smooths out parts of the mesh that are highly distorted. B tier. The smooth Laplacian modifier also helps to smooth out your mesh, but it does it in a slightly different way, and the results are also slightly different. It also gives you a bit more control over how this smoothness is applied, and I think B tier is a good spot for it. The surface deform modifier helps you copy another object's motion, usually a plane, to your main object. For example, you can have a simple plane with a cloth simulation, and then you can use this simulation to deform other, more complicated meshes. This way, you have a simulation without your PC exploding all of a sudden. C tier. The warp modifier is pretty simple too. You add an empty that will push the geometry outwards, and another empty that will guide the direction of it. The use cases for this are also pretty niche, and there are many other better ways to do the same thing, so I put this in D tier. The wave modifier helps you to make waves, whether it's motion graphics or making water ripple effects. It's pretty fun and useful, so I'll put it in B tier. The edit normal modifier helps you to change the way your normals look in different ways. One use case for it is in game foliage. In the example that the Blender documentation provided, we have two trees. The left one is the one with no modifiers, and the right one is the one with the edit normal modifier. As you can see, it makes the tree look fuller. Although I wouldn't see myself using it, I think it can be pretty useful, so I'll put it in B. Next, the weighted normal modifier. What it does is that it tightens up your normals. You especially see this when you have a simple object and then you add a bevel modifier with a low segment count. So you then add a weighted normal modifier to tighten things up. It's essential when doing hard surface modeling, so it goes right in B tier. And we have arrived at the physics modifiers. You usually add these modifiers in the physics tab, where you also edit their properties, but since they are also in the modifiers tab, let's go over them as well. The cloth modifier helps you to make cloth. You have different cloth presets and other cool settings like pressure. A tier. The dynamic paint modifier is used for a lot of effects where an object is interacting with the surface that it comes in contact with. Examples of that are when you want mud trails, snow trails, or maybe you want your object to have ripples like it's in water or something. A tier. The explode modifier is pretty self-explanatory as well. It explodes your objects into different pieces. For making realistic looking explosions, you need more than just what the explosion modifier offers, so I'll put it in B. The fluid modifier is used for making fluids. It's pretty good when it comes to fire and smoke, but when it comes to liquid, it's just a pain. So another B. The ocean modifier is for making oceans. You have all sorts of parameters to make a calm or stormy ocean. S. The particle system modifier has two modes. Particles, which is for emitting particles, and hair, which is obviously for making hair and hair. S tier. The particle instance node takes an object and replaces the particles of a particle system with that object. I'll put it in C. And finally, the soft body modifier is for making things like jello or rubber duckies and everything like that. There are also hair modifiers, but there are so many that I think it's better if I make a video dedicated to just the hair modifiers. So let me know if I should make that video. With that said, thanks for watching, bye, see ya.